We are recording. All right, so today we're going over exercise 2. Keep in mind it's a lot like exercise 1, and as I was explaining before, there's still time for exercise 1. And this isn't definitely to cause any anxiety, right? Don't get me wrong, when you're learning these programs, they can cause a lot of anxiety, right? To say the very least. You're trying to work the program in the way that you think, and it's just not working, right? However, as I've said before, if you can master Rhino, you can master any other program, or at least those other programs start to become a little bit easier because they're using the same vocabulary, they're using a lot of the same coding and things like this. However, when we get into Revit, you'll see, of course, the differences and the magic of Revit as well. But that being the case, obviously we're still going in 2D and 3D, but really focused on a three-dimensional object today. So really expanding on some of the commands that we can use in order to make some pretty interesting objects. However, keep in mind, none of these objects have to do anything with the assignment. They're just really cool objects that can all be made in Rhino. And often, if you'd like some extra credit, I ask you to try and make one, right? So, of course, don't try to do that first. Obviously, you want to get the skills down first. But you'll see that there are some vague instructions like before. But for this next exercise, we'll be looking deeper into the 3D commands that can also be utilized in architecture design abstraction. The point of this exercise is to practice modeling, but also refers to our learned skills of Design 1, composition. For this exercise, you will focus less on the process and more of the product of the object itself, using Boolean operations, sweep 1, sweep 2, pipe, network surface, lofts, or polycurves. We set out to make spaciously interesting compositional objects. There should be an S there. Following the step-by-step instructions to again show the step-by-step order of operations and to ensure efficiency of the modeling workspace. So again, we're trying to tackle a lot of technical aspects. You may have noticed there was no real attention to design critique there. Obviously, even what I did today, we didn't talk about how great or bad the object was, right? We talked about how it was being communicated. So again, a huge part of computer graphics is using the computer to communicate, which for a lot, is really hard. Face it, we started off at like 1995. Anyway, nostalgia involved. But in our case, we'll start off with the exact same step. Create a 25 by 25 by 25 box. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and put my stuff over here. There we go. That way I can kind of flip back and forth between them. And again, shoot, look, I've already got the same step right here. I could just copy. Why work harder when I can work smarter, guys? Right? So you can technically do this all in the same file. Another thing that I like to do to keep organized is, well, make another one, copy, and I'll call it exercise 1. After all, I may have a professor, especially in studio, that maybe wants to, hey, what was that last step that you showed me 2 Mondays ago? Do you still have that? That was better. Oh, crap, I deleted it. Why would you do that in a digital realm where you can keep it forever? You don't even have to store it anywhere. It's amazing, right? However, honestly, storage in the computer still freaks me out, like how a terabyte and 1 megabyte are really the same size. But it's the compression of the inner working or the lattice of those structures. Anyway, it gets weird, but we'll do exercise 1 for today and just stay organized. I'll make that a little bit bigger so that I can see it from space. Voila, right? Even if that starts to get in the way, another thing that I can do is highlight all of it and type in hide. Get it out of the way. That solves 2 issues, both visually and it actually saves my RAM on my computer, right? So some of you, especially if you've ever designed something in Studio, right, it can get very complex very quick, and the computer is constantly trying to make all of that stuff for you, right? If I hide it, well, it's no longer using the CPU or GPU or RAM in order to create those things. You'll notice once you hide something, it goes a little bit faster, right? And that's definitely intentional. However, we have step 1, 25 by 25 by 25. Got it. Step 2, what do we need? All right, apply 3 subtractions of space to the object only in the X and only in the Y axis, right? So it's a bit vague, right? Apply 3 subtractions. What does that mean? Well, let's subtract from it, right? We could use boxes, we could use other objects, we could use just about anything. Like I said, we're not so worried about what the object looks like, but we do want to test some things. So if you didn't get to Boolean difference for exercise 1, let's try it out now, right? So let's go ahead and make 3 objects. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and start off a new layer. I'm going to call it exercise 2. Just that way I don't get confused. So exercise 2, and I'm going to call it subtraction. I don't know, I'm feeling that green today. It definitely pops for the projector. Maybe not always best on a white piece of paper, but definitely in the projector. You'll notice that we have definitely a couple of objects that we can just make on the fly, right? And we can actually extrude objects as well. So for instance, I don't know, maybe I want this cone. I'm gonna go with the cone. I can't really control the Z in the top view, so I can inactive view at the same time as being inside of the command. And that is a game changer. It wasn't always that way. But in my case, maybe I want to subtract that cone. I'm going to zoom extents. That way I can kind of zoom in on the object, fly around it. Okay, I could see that being a potentially awesome subtraction. Maybe a little bit bigger. Why not? I kind of like that. Alright, so that'll be subtraction 1. Let's move it in a little bit. However, be careful about stuff like that. As you'll see, I'm going to leave that for today just to kind of show you what to do to get out of that, or to see if it works. I mean, why not? Let's get a second object involved. However, let's, presets are cool, but I mean, what's even cooler is when I can make my own shape. So I'm going to start off with some sort of object, and we'll kind of just fake it till we make it. I like to call this the fortune cookie. Totally just made that up. But in this case, I need to make the object, so I'm going to extrude it. Extrude. And in this case, yes, it is a curve, so technically a curve. I know there's 2 different definitions of curve here. I'll constantly say it, and it'll feel weird for a while. But I'm going to go ahead and extrude that curve, enter, and it's going to ask me, well, how big do you want it? And do you want it solid? Yes, I would like it solid, thank you. So in my case, that'll be my object for today. And not too shabby, but maybe I want to rotate it, right? I mean, by all means, I don't have to be a square too. And that's looking pretty sweet. And I'm going to use that as my subtraction. However, you may want to be able to see in the object, right? For instance, you're like, okay, well, I think it's going into that purple box, but maybe not that much. It's hard to say, right? And to be fair, something like that is going to cause some issues, but again, I'm going to kind of leave it so that you know what to do to get out of it as well. In our case, though, I can switch the view to, say, a ghosted or an X-ray. When it's X-rayed, I can see actually inside the object a little bit better and start to see that, well, it is actually colliding with that object. Maybe I want it a little bit more. Sweet. Not too shabby. And actually we got rid of some of those issues. I'm making new ones, so I'm going to get rid of that one. All right, maybe I need to make it a little bit bigger. Again, Gumball is your best friend. Don't get me wrong, I could type in scale 1D or scale 3D, and I could still scale it, but I mean, if I can just use 1 click rather than 3 clicks, again, that's saving myself potentially some time. And my last object for today, I don't know, I'm just going to go with a regular box, right? Because boxes aren't that bad. We use a lot of boxes in architecture. There's definitely nothing wrong with that. And I'm going to maybe remove something from the top, right? It did say actually only in the X and Y direction. I'm already kind of breaking the rules here, but rules were made to be broken. Right? The reason I put some of these rules is just to make sure that we can actually get something out of it, because very often some people will be like, I didn't break the rules, and they just put like a cone into a wall, and it's like, well, it doesn't really influence much. You know, try to influence the object is maybe a better rule to go for. So in my case, again, I'm going to try and at least stick to my rules, and maybe not try to affect the top surface, that Z surface. And that's looking pretty sweet. I'll keep it like that. However, I'm not just going to do it all there. I might mess up, right, or run into some errors. So I'm going to do a step 1.1. In fact, I could delete if I basically wanted to maintain that step 1, step 2. I can go this way too. It's really up to you. I mean, you don't have to exactly do what I do, guys. In fact, I would recommend you don't. Find your own way, because this is definitely over 15 years of working with this program. You got to keep yourself organized, and the more organized you are now, the better you help your future self, trust me. So put in that extra few seconds to be organized, to say the very least, and it's definitely a good habit to have. However, step 2, let's start subtracting from here. Like I said, I might mess up, so let's get a copy of that. Select it all, and I'll kind of do it off to the side. After all, I am in need of explaining this object and what I did, so I may very well need to explain that. So let's do it. Boolean difference. I'm going to take the clay that I want to subtract from. I'm going to type in boo, as in scared you. And it's actually going to bring up a few, right? So Boolean two objects, Boolean difference. Technically, these kind of do the exact same thing. They're both more of a subtractive form. Boolean union, or sorry, Boolean intersection is kind of new. It's, again, when two parts intersect, if you wanted to keep that intersection, that is, of course, what we could do. And Boolean split, technically, is kind of a subtraction thing, too. Kind of does the same thing. And Boolean union is definitely the additive. I can add to my object and put two objects together and make them one without grouping them, which doesn't actually do that, by the way, or joining them, which only works with lines, right? We can't join three-dimensional objects. In fact, if you type in what, you'll see that all of these objects are the same. If you type in what, all these objects are the same, right? They're all, in this case, a valid extrusion. It even tells us what we did and how to make it, how many points it has, how heavy is it. No, it doesn't tell us how heavy it is, but it could, potentially, right? Especially if it gave us the mass. Anyway, so let's subtract from it. So Boolean, I'm going to use split for today. Why not? Mostly because split, I can do as many objects as I want at a time. Now it's going to ask me, hey, what surfaces do you want to cut? And I'm going to be like, well, this one, that one, this one, and from the original. I'm going to hit enter and bam, just like that. In fact, it's going to keep everything and make it actually really hard to look at. So I'm going to switch back to my ghosted or shaded view, right, to maybe see what it actually did. I'm going to move these out of the way to see what it actually did. All right. We got some kind of cool object. In fact, maybe these are actually worth keeping instead of those. I mean, after all, I already have them right there. Let's get rid of that one. Oh, let's just move it. I might need it later. I might need to explain what I did. But not bad. We got an object. And to be fair, dang. I mean, that's practically a museum already. You know what I'm saying? Mass modeling already right here. But like I said, it's not about the object. Let's keep going. So I'm going to copy it, because why would I do all that again? And we'll put it somewhere over there and get ourselves a step 3. Again, copy. I usually use the box itself to lock onto another box. But to be fair, I do it kind of a different way each time to explain that there's not one perfect way to do everything. In fact, I'll often say there's 15 ways to do the exact same thing in just about any other program. So it's versatile. But let's move on. Step 3. Oh, where'd it go? There we go. Step 3, apply 3 additions of pipe-like objects to intersect with the object in the X, Y, or Z axis. So it's a little bit more free now, and now we can use some pipe objects in order to make something. Obviously, the thing to learn here is what can we do with some pipe objects. So a couple of things that we can do is just type in pipe. So for instance, I can do something straight. And of course, it's always going to draw flat, right? Or in that top view. You'll notice that no matter where I draw in this view, it'll stay either in the X, Y, or Z, right? That's based on your C plane. But if you guys remember, this is our C plane. It can be moved, by the way. Just in case you actually do like it and you do want to move it, I would move the C plane, not necessarily all my stuff, right? Because my stuff is already ordered and things like that. So if I type in C plane and I go basically world, right? I want to reset my world, and in my case, I want to control the top view, right? And I can basically set it back to the top view. Well, nothing changed because it was already there, but let's type that again. I can move my C plane as well. In my case, you'll see that by default, it just, hey, where do you want it, right? Well, if I want it over here, I can, right? So I can't undo that, by the way. C plane for some reason is not like part of the operations, it's a part of the interface. So again, if you're trying to edit undo, it won't work, and I accidentally edited undo my line. So I can redo something, by the way. Again, you just can't mess up in this program. Am I right? Anyway. So we got a pipe-like object here, definitely orthogonal. Let's try something a little bit more chaotic, like, I don't know, some sort of curvilinear line. That's looking pretty sweet. I could even change it up, so you'll notice when you click on a line, you can also select the point itself, and you could really mess with the object, right? For instance, right now, I mean, that's one heck of a line. I can't really see it right now, so let's re-zoom in on it. Awesome. But you can see it's quite the three-dimensional line, right? Let's move my curve line too. How many of you guys struggle with making a roof in Design Studio? You can make roofs now. Anyway, we'll get to that a little bit more. But at least in terms of pipes and rails and all those wonderful things, we can just type in pipe, right? So if you type in pipe, it's actually going to ask for that radius. In our case, it is in feet. So when it says 1, it's actually saying 1 foot. So if I want actually another dimension, I could put 6 inches, enter, bam, 6-inch rails, right? I mean, can you imagine if I had to draw this all the time? Anyway, but okay, that's pretty sweet, definitely useful and pretty easy. I just type in pipe. What if I want something else? Now, keep in mind it's going to keep the curve there, so I'm going to copy that because why would I do that all over again? And let's take one of these curves, copy. And let's maybe try some sweeps, right? So sweeps are really cool because you can do any shape. So a pipe can only do a circle, right? I mean, that's great if I'm doing handrails, but what if I want to go Louis Kahn, right? And I want specific profiles in order to kind of shape that. I mean, don't get me wrong, if I extrude, it can only go straight, right? So for instance, maybe this is a chaotic profile. Don't get me wrong, if I extrude something, like I just went over, it only goes straight. However, in a sweep, well, as long as I make this orthogonal, and what I mean by that, so let's move it. I want to put it to actually where the end point is. It doesn't matter which end point, so I can either choose that side, the beginning, or the end. But I do need to make it a surface normal. And what does that mean? Does anybody know what surface normals are? It's something that's perpendicular to a surface. So right now, my surface normal of my forehead, I have tons of them, right? Surface normal, surface normal, surface normal, surface normal, because there's tons of perpendicular lines coming from that curve. Does that make sense, guys? Maybe my forehead isn't the best example, but I think most of us understand that there's curvilinear surfaces versus flat surfaces, and that's a true dichotomy, right? I mean, I dare you, try to name a different kind of surface. It's either curved or it's not, right? So in our case, I do want to make it perpendicular to the initial line. Since that line is already at an angle, fake it till you make it, right? It's not at the end of the world if it's not perfect, but let's at least get that somewhat close, right? So in our case, it's still not quite perpendicular, right? Let's maybe see it in another view. Yeah, still not quite perpendicular, right? Let's maybe rotate it a little bit more, maybe move it a little bit. In fact, you'll notice Gumball always finds the centroid for you. So if you have a weird object, if you notice and you look at Gumball really closely, it's always finding the center of the object for you, which is kind of nice, especially in this situation where I want to make sure that it's congruent. So it's looking pretty good, not too shabby. Let's see what it does. So I'm going to type in sweep. Sweep 1 in this case, there are 2. Sweep 1 is for when you have 1 profile, sweep 2 is when you have 2 profiles or 2 rails. We won't get so much into sweep 2, it's not extremely useful. But sweep 1 is, and it tells us what we need. Select the rail. Okay, I got it. Select the sweep shapes or profiles, sometimes it'll say. Sweep. And now select any other sweep shapes. I already got them. Press enter. All right. So drag seam. Now basically right now it's asking, hey, which direction do you want to go? This way, that way? Doesn't really matter in our case, so just press enter. And voila. That profile is following that exact line. So this is what I meant by anybody having trouble making roofs, no longer the case. In fact, we can build objects, we can break and explode those objects and use them now to be a roof, right? Now this is pretty chaotic. Obviously, I don't want you to even do this for the assignment. It's a bit much. So I'm gonna make that a little bit smaller. Let's go back to our object and make that a little bit smaller. Of course, I'm gonna hold shift. And I do want them to be pipe-like, not surface or roof-like. right? But I did want to throw that in there because, again, I want you to be able to use this in Studio tomorrow, today, right? I want you to be able to use it. It doesn't make any sense to go through this entire class and be like, now I'm ready to use it in Studio, right? Like, I want you to use it at the same time. So let's try that again. Sweep. Sorry, I didn't mean to sound so much like Mickey Mouse there, but clearly Disney has been rubbing off on me lately. Oh, don't press spacebar, by the way. I have a bad habit of using spacebar for my enter. Doesn't always work that way anymore. Sweet. Definitely a little bit more pipe-like and definitely useful for our project. So, sweet. And we're good to go. Let's try it with a curvilinear item, and let's try it with a curvilinear profile, right? Does that still work? Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't, right? So it's better to kind of test these things, get familiar with them. So let's do it with, I don't know, some sort of bean shape, kidney bean. Make sure it's closed. If you don't know if it's closed or not, you can always type in what. And it'll quite literally tell you that it is a closed object. In our case, it is a valid curve. And I'm looking for closed, closed, closed. Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't tell us in this case. I lied. Or maybe I'm just not seeing it. You might see it in the recording though. But in that case, say something wasn't closed, by the way. Everything's an opportunity to teach, right? If it's not closed per se, let's get that curvilinear line. Maybe I get so close and I think it's closed, but it's not closed. And it looks closed from a certain distance, but isn't. It's not going to work, right? Because it needs a closed profile. However, if I need to fix it real quick, I can put close curve, and it magically closes it for me. So again, I do want to express that because, again, you might run into an issue that we don't necessarily run into in the tutorial. Same thing, let's find the surface normal. So the perpendicular to this point, which perpendicular to that line, right? It is kind of weird. Kind of have to think outside the box here a little bit, right? You may need to even use a different view to understand where it's at or what it looks like. Oh, it's not even close. When I could have swore it was on there, guys, right? I mean, how many of you guys have done that already? Where you think it's one way in the perspective, but it's in fact way off in the distance or in the space, right? So in our case, get it close, and that's honestly pretty close, right? Again, trying to find the centroid. Oh, there's the centroid. So again, moving that centroid, perfect. Let's try sweep one again. Sweep one. It's going to ask us for the rail. Awesome. Enter. It's going to ask for the shapes. Enter. Which direction? Doesn't really matter in this case. However, if you click on it, you'll notice it changes direction. Right? You see that little arrow? Anyway, it might be kind of hard to see. We'll hit enter. Awesome. And voila. Right? Pretty unique shape if you ask me. In fact, if you've ever wondered how Pixar makes all those crazy stuff, this is how we do it. We'll go into rendered mode and bam. You know, it's completely smooth and looks like a spaghetti noodle, right, to say the very least. However, let's get out of rendered before my screen share crashes. Another thing you'll notice is by default they are open, right? That is an option under sweep. You'll see that there's a little box that says close sweep. Another thing that we can do is type in cap, like as in stop the cap, and we can cap it, right? Right, in order to make that a solid object. So those are looking pretty good. What was the instructions again? I need to use it to add to my piece now. So it is saying apply 3 additions. So what do we need to use? Boolean subtraction? Nah, we need Boolean union because union means to come together, right? So let's, like I said, we're gonna get the wild spaghetti monster going on here, but don't get me wrong, you don't have to be so flamboyant with the spices as I'm being today. And what I'd say is, you know, use your compositional skills or your design mind in order to make that the best of your ability. But for today, I'm going to use these 3 chaotic pieces. And I'm going to get rid of these because I don't really need to show them in the diagram either. They're really for the sake of tutorial. So, oh, forgot to say step 3. And like I said, I'm going to try and finish up the modeling today, and hopefully give you guys a little bit of time to ask questions at the end of class as well. However, I think it's in the Z direction, so pipe like X, Y, or Z axis. All right, we got some options. I'm going to go with the Z axis because I haven't really done anything, but I do kind of appreciate when these things stick out and come and kind of interact with the space. I do think it makes a pretty unique object, to say the least. However, I may need to size it up or size it down, right? So again, gumball is your best friend. Right? That's looking pretty sweet. Maybe I rotate it. Not bad. Okay. Getting fancy with the spices. Look at that. That's pretty sweet. Not too bad. Maybe I actually change to a ghosted view. Ooh. You know, Bohuslav, his favorite is Ghost. Just in case you were wondering. Let's switch that up. Yeah, let's go like that. Kind of want to go outside and inside the object, you know. Getting fancy with the spices. That's pretty sweet, but it's kind of too long going on here. So let's shrink that down. Maybe scoot that up. And maybe a little bit of rotation. Not too shabby. Alright, so it's going a little outside the box, a little inside the box. I can appreciate it, I can dig it. And let's influence that space as well. It's still a bit long. Let's shorten it down a little bit. Not too shabby. We got some in the Z direction. Let's get one more actually. In all directions. Since it was allowed for this step, I'm just going to go all directions. So X, Y, and Z. And not too bad. Now let's try to add them. So I don't want to mess up. I may need an extra copy. So again, this is all for the sake of communication. So, of course, I held shift there so that it moved it kind of nicely. You'll notice when you move stuff in perspective, you can go up to the side, any direction. So be careful with that. It's very easy to accidentally do this. Copy. This is without holding shift, by the way. And it'll actually be way off in the distance, right? So be aware of moving stuff in perspective. But let's go ahead and do Boolean union to this guy. What's nice is we can select all of it. Boolean union. Voila. Oh no. What happened? Definitely not what we needed. In fact, it seemed to actually get rid of something. It nearly subtracted it instead of actually putting it together, right? So let's try that maybe actually one at a time. In my case, I'm going to start off with my clay. And I'm going to do Boolean union. And it's going to ask me, hey, what do you want to put together? And I'm going to go, well, I want you to put this one and this one together. Enter. Hey, you guys notice that one changed color? Right? That's because it worked, right? However, this kind of looks open. That could be because of the ghosted view. So let's just double check. Yeah, it's definitely because of the ghosted view. Because that will definitely hinder you from putting two objects together if one is open and one is closed. It doesn't like to put two different categories together. It's a category error. It's kind of like if you try to put a three-dimensional object and a two-dimensional object together, you're going to get a syntax error on your calculator. Why? Because it's a category error, right? It's kind of like you can't science a shape, right? Can you find the cause and effect of a shape? Yeah, I didn't think so. That's why it's called geometry. Geometry and science are two different things. That's why if you look at STEM, it says science, technology, engineering, and math. They're separate. You even take separate classes. However, you know, popular cartoon would suggest that math is science, and that's definitely not the case. Anyway, let's try it one more time. So, Boolean union. Awesome. I'm going to select that shape that worked for me, and I'm going to select the next shape, right? Oh, I guess I didn't type in the command. Boolean union. So that object and this one now. Enter. It worked. It turned and added that object. You'll notice when you click on that object, bam, right? It's all part of one object. You'll also notice that it's no longer going straight through that object. It's considered as a mass, right? And last but not least, let's get this one. Maybe this one was the culprit. Maybe this was actually the problem. Let's try and union it. And that one. Enter. That one is the problem. So let's find out what's going on. In fact, remember I said I made this one on purpose to be the problem. But you'll notice if an object collides with itself already, then it's not really a solid or closed object. So be very careful about kind of the crazy objects that you make, at least in this exercise. Now, I know, to be fair, most of us won't make something this crazy in studio, right? It's usually a little bit more timid and conservative in that way. But just keep in mind, not everything works, right? Just because it looks cool, just because it made it, doesn't mean it's actually working. In fact, I noticed the culprit right there. See all that funky geometry? Well, it's colliding with itself. There is no outside. The computer doesn't actually know what this object is. It knows what code is, but it's not really smart yet, right? Just like AI is not really smart yet. It's got large language models, and yes, it could do it really fast, but it's not actually able to fix itself. In fact, it still needs us. So in our case, I might either have to delete this object, or let's try and move it around first, right? I mean, after all, it might be because I'm going outside the object, inside the object, outside the object, inside, and vice versa. I'm doing a lot for it. So maybe I simplify that and try to keep more inside of the object there. That might work for us. Let's test it out. Boolean union, this one and this one, please. Enter. Not quite, right? So again, it's having a problem specifically with this object. I may just make another object, right? Not a big deal. Obviously, I did some so that you would run into some certain things, right? Let's go ahead and just copy this one for now, for the sake of tutorial. However, if it was me doing this assignment, I would just take that opportunity to make another object. No big deal here. But let's take that one and fake it till we make it, at least for today. And that's looking pretty chaotic, to say the least. And we should have no issue here. So, Boolean union, I'll take that one, enter. And as you can see, the one that you select first is the layer that it's going to accept. You'll notice that it went from purple and it actually changed to the red one that I use. So, not a big deal. I could select it and just right click and change the object layer back, right? Not a big deal. But sweet, I've got step 2, step 3 done. Let's take this object and keep going. Now the fun part, making surfaces. Copy. Step 4, and so on. What is step 4? All right, lastly, create a 30 by 30 foot unique surface. Well, that's vague. Unique surface to slice through the object in 2 pieces. Well, that seems fair enough. Split it in half with some sort of surface. Now, to be fair, this was actually the reason this program was invented, right? So that we could mill and make different surfaces without having to spend money and actually make it first. Can you imagine if we had to do that all the time? We'd be broke. Business would go out of business, right? You'd be constantly making stuff. I haven't spent a dime yet making any of this, and yet, well, I have a physical model that I can literally see and kind of rotate, and eventually we'll have VR headsets probably in our glasses or contacts. I mean, let's face it, in our generation, it probably will get there. LASIK will become, anyway, I'm not trying to make some futuristic predictions, but I hope that somebody's watching this video 20 years from now and is like, he's right. Anyway, so for step 4, we need to make a surface, so let's go ahead and make that surface first. And to be fair, there's a couple ways to do so. The first one, being one of my favorites, is actually a surface from 3 or 4 points. That's literally what it's called. You'll notice that it shows a surface that looks like it's made out of 3 or 4 points. One of my favorites because quite literally you can make a surface. Done, right? Not too shabby there. I can take these points. I can hit Command, well, you can use F10. On the Mac, you do have to hold the function button and do F10. I can take 2 points and I can move them. And voila, I have Le Corbusier's Pavilion of 1954. Anyway, if you don't know that reference, that's okay. But instantly, I can make a roof. I mean, how many, again, I say it all the time, how many of you guys struggle with making roofs? I totally did in studio all the time. In fact, I'd make all these awesome floor plans and I'd be like, how the heck am I supposed to cap this thing? In fact, I had a professor at Texas Tech that goes, no, you're supposed to design the roof first and the building comes underneath. Now, neither of us were right or wrong in this way. To be fair, both, I would say they need to be designed together, right? So again, there's different ideologies when it comes to this, but my goodness, we have such a tool now in order to do so. From here, I can basically offset surface, giving it a thickness. So if I type in offset, you'll see offset surf, and we can tell it even which direction we want to go. Do we want to offset this way, offset that way? Well, I know my roof is going to be a foot thick. Yeah, it's a big roof, guys. So I'm going to type in 12 inches or 1 and type in enter, and voila, I have a roof. I can go into render mode and see exactly what that roof does in terms of shade and shadow. And as you can see, it's still a bit choppy. You guys see that? Still triangulated, right? So let's make some more surfaces. So don't get me wrong, that could be a 30 by 30 surface. I may need to actually make a rectangle that is 30 feet first by 30 feet. That way I at least give myself a plan view. I mean, don't get me wrong, you may have noticed I didn't like go in and be like, is that a 30 surface or is that 31? Again, some of my instructions are really just to kind of give us a ballpark area. That way somebody's not making a football field versus a tiny napkin, right, and things like this. But one of my other favorite tools is actually called network surface. So in my case, I'm going to switch views here. I'm going to find this piece. Sometimes I'll click on this piece, I'll click on the viewport, and I'll do zoom extents to kind of find exactly where I am. Oh, nice, there's where I am, and ooh, nice, there's where I am. So I can really focus in on an object, and yes, some views are better than others, to say the very least. I mean, look at that, you can't see that line. But in this one, you can see pretty well, right, to say the least. And I can even lift it up to make it a little bit easier to see. But let's go ahead and draw and make some really cool surfaces. In my case, I'm going to go with that, and really just kind of stick. And again, I'm really actually looking at my perspective view right now. Okay, enter. I'm going to take that line, and I'm still going to change it. All right, so I'm going to take that point. I don't know, that's pretty sweet. You know, I'm thinking some roof design, just a little bit, right? I'm going to go ahead and mirror this, because why do that over and over again when I can just mirror it? I can take both of those, mirror it again. Just because we understand geometry well in architecture. And look at that. It's almost like we kind of have a surface, right? Well, when you use network surface, it will actually put them all together. However, I do need them to be touching, and they need to be technically, they don't have to be closed as in one object, but they do need to be touching, right? And that's just a network surface. So I'll take this one, this one, and that one. I'll type in network surface. And voila. Look at that. Now you too can have the Frank Gehry roofs, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's kind of a hard thing in itself, and to be fair, he didn't actually do any of that work. He did the design, but really it was the architect, the 12 other architects that were computer programmers that literally designed an entire new software just for Gehry and to actually build these things, right? Guess what it was based off of? Rhino 3D. So again, it being such an open software, you're allowed to take the license and make your own program out of it, and so people did, and they called it the Gehry Foundation program. Anyway, we can add thickness to it too, so offset surface, enter, voila, right? Definitely not too bad. It's kind of a large, thick napkin going on right now, but again, a lot of potential here in terms of being able to manipulate. So let's say I go back, maybe I want this side over here, maybe I want this side, I don't know. I don't want it so congruent. Can it do it? On today's episode of Can It Be Done? That's looking pretty sweet, I'm not gonna lie. I could take 2 points at the same time. So if I hold function F10, if you're on a Windows, you can just hit F10 key, but it's gonna activate the points. And that is a game changer as well, because I can control multiple curves at the same time. And let's make this a little bit more congruent. And what I mean by congruent is just a little more regular. Right? That's looking pretty sweet. I don't know. Let's find out. Network surface. It's going to say, hey, which ones are you talking about? These 4. Enter. Voila. So, to be fair, the world is your oyster, as they say. You can make just about anything. However, if we can make it in the digital realm, it's not completely true that we can make it in reality, right? As you guys saw with some of those chaotic pieces that we're making, we can't break Newton's law of, what do you call it? 2 things can't occupy the same space at the exact same time. It's the second law of something, anyway. Don't quote me on that one. But in our case, we do have a surface, and we do need to split this in half as our last step. So let's go ahead and do so. I'm going to keep the pieces. That way, just in case I mess up, that's okay, I can try again. So I'm going to take that piece, and again, this program does copying very well. So let's get a 30 by 30. And it doesn't really say how I have to split it up, so I'm going to split it up like this. That's looking pretty sweet. I may have to make it a little bigger, and that's okay too. Like I said, ballpark it. But I do want to make sure that I go completely through the object. That's important because, well, right now it's not going to work. It's not going completely through the object. And don't assume that the computer just knows what to do, because it don't, right, for sure. So we might need to either make that a little bit bigger or move it, right? And as you can see, what I'm doing here is really verifying that it's going straight through the object. Obviously we see some pieces, right, to say the very least. Okay, it's definitely going to chop that up, okay. And it does, at least for right now, appear that it's going straight through the object, even right there. So another way we could verify is go into like a ghosted mode or X-ray and really verify that it's going straight through the object. So let's try a few things. In fact, I'll make a couple of copies for the sake of tutorial, because there are multiple ways in order to make surfaces or shapes. I didn't even go over the last one I wanted to go over. Well, pause, right, before we go over that one. I want you to know that, well, we can make lofts as well, just in case you've never used a loft before. So in this case, I'm going to take this one. I'm going to delete these ones, just to kind of show off what loft can do. I'm going to copy it, and just fake it till I make it. And you kind of see where this is going, almost like a rib system of something. So I can kind of change the ribs as well. So for instance, I'm just going to get fancy with the spices. Oh, I guess not. Well, man, that's real fancy. Let's see what that does. I'm kind of interested. In fact, I know that's going to be chaotic, so I'm going to try this. I'm going to take one here and one there. Let's see what it does. I'm interested. What is it going to do? All right. And as you can see, I made a surface. But it's made through a loft. And what's nice about that is we get a lot more options with loft compared to, like, say, a network surface where it's kind of destined on those 4 curves. What's nice about loft is, well, I wish we could actually edit these real time. We'll get to that when we get to Grasshopper. But at least in terms of a regular Rhino loft, we can't manipulate this at the same time. However, there's some different options, such as loose, and you'll see that it previews, tight, and not really a whole lot of differences between those. We can also rebuild them, which is really nice. I wish Network Surface would do that. But if we wanted to increase the DPI or the density or the clarity of this surface, for instance, right now, if I render it, you're going to see these kind of shapes. Oh, man, I forgot I can't render at the same time either. But you can kind of see it, right? The shade shows us that it's smooth, but really this piece is still kind of flat. So if I switch it to 100, we're going to get lots and lots of lines in there. And in fact, it's going to start looking more like a smooth surface. So if I go to rendered view, nice and smooth, right, to say the very least. But didn't want to rob you of that, so let's go back to shaded and let's cut this thing in half. Sweet. Couple of options. I'm going to try a trim method here. So I'm going to click on the object I want to trim with. I'm going to type in trim, and I'm going to cut the other side. It works. However, I still have the rest of the surface. What happens if I click on the surface? Absolutely nothing. So let's hit enter and try again. Instead, now I'm going to use this as my trim table. I'm going to type in trim and see if I can trim off the excess. Voila. Okay, let's check it out. Let's make sure it worked. And yeah, it totally does. Look at that. This is the final object that we're looking for, right? Now what's great is that actually worked. It doesn't always work, and actually I was hoping that it wouldn't work so I could show you how to make it work. So I'm going to kind of mess up this one on purpose and see what we have to do there. But really the last thing that we got to do here is put them together. So in my case I'll do that, and I'll type in join. And as long as it's 2 open surfaces, which they were, it'll join like items. However, if one was a closed surface and one was an open surface, that join is not going to work because, again, another syntax error. But in our case, in the sake of the exercise, this is really my final step, right? So I'll do a final copy. And yes, it does look a little weird. So we'll call that one final. Voila, we are actually done with the project. But in our case, or at least done with the modeling part of the project, as you guys know. But let's say we run into a thing that doesn't work. So let me try and make this not work real quick. Yeah, that'll probably not work. Well, let's make sure that it actually doesn't. And maybe rotate a little bit. But very often I do stuff on purpose that doesn't work, guys, because you're going to run into stuff that doesn't work for you. But keep in mind, you do have to make sure that it goes straight through the object, right? That's just never going to work, especially if it doesn't go straight through. But that's it's kind of cut. It's definitely cut in half, and it definitely goes through the object. Let's see if it not works, right? So we'll take that trim. Dang it, everything's working. Usually I don't have this problem. Usually it's the other way around. You're like trying to get it to work, right? However, let's say that it didn't work. What I would do is actually increase this and I'd turn it into an object instead of a surface. Why? Because, well, this is an object. And again, liked items like to work with other liked items. So the problem that starts to happen is, well, this is a surface versus an object. Again, normally those don't trim and they don't work together. In some cases they do, like with trim, right? Especially if there's a defining moment. But in our case, if it is not working, I can offset surface. I can give it some thickness. So in my case, I'm going to make it extremely thin, like 1 inch. And it's going to barely be noticeable. But now it's technically an object, so what I could do is Boolean difference or Boolean subtract it. So I'm going to type in boo. I'm going to type in Boolean split. Click, click, enter. And voila, it's still going to technically do the same thing, right? But arguably now, I have all three, and it actually nicely enough keeps the surface, so that's kind of a plus. So anyway, just wanted to make sure that you guys are in the right spot when you're going over this part. However, it's already a pretty long video. However, I'm definitely open to some questions at the end if you have some particular questions. No, I'm not going to help you in Illustrator right now. Let it be a modeling question if that be the case. Any questions out there?
You had said that,
Yes.
that these were going to be extra credit.
Yes. That's a completely separate thing, totally optional. So yeah, if you sat there and didn't listen to me and just started making an object, that was not the way to do it. Not saying that that's what you did, but I've had students kind of do that and they're like, sir, this is assignment 2, and I'm like, did you even read it?
No.
Right, kind of thing. That's just there to, honestly, to look cool, to be completely honest. But it is extra credit. If you do want to practice modeling, those are some good ways to practice modeling.
I was going to ask about the topo facade one.
Which one?
Specifically says topo facade.
Nice.
And I'm assuming, like, is that just using that like same method we just did with the split, the Boolean split?
I'm still looking for topo facade. Where?
Right there, it's 640.
640. Oh, okay. Yeah, you could. Let's see what you do to make that one. Honestly, there's probably 6 ways to make all of these. Right, there, like I said, there's not one way to make just one thing. That's for sure. But definitely a good question. I'll leave that up to you. Keep in mind, for the extra credit, you don't have to show us like the step-by-step. It's just the object. But yeah, some of these are easier than others, right? Like I could think just extruding that shape, if you will. Some are a little harder than others, right? You have to use maybe a box mesh or box edit. Just totally write that one down because it's totally awesome. We probably won't get into it much until later, but yeah, some of these are definitely easier than others. But again, totally extra credit, not part of the assignment. Keep in mind that this is the assignment. So definitely great question. Thank you. Any others, guys? All right, well, we'll leave it at there for today.